All right. It's hot. It's going.
Cool.
This is episode 12, and we're in this beautiful house on this great piece of land out near Echo Lake with Nikki Martin.
Hi.
So we'll just get right into it, I guess. You mentioned I'm just kind of curious about your background, really. You mentioned you grew up in Brampton.
Yes.
How did you wind up... I should say I've been studying yoga with Nikki for roughly a year, whenever I can make it to class. And what brought you to yoga? How'd you get there?
It's been about 6 years. So I guess the truthful, most honest answer is I needed kind of a new addiction in my life. I've been pretty open and public about the fact that I've struggled with addiction for most of my life in varying degrees and kinds. The last one was alcohol. And the year after my father died, I kind of had to make a choice about whether I wanted to have a life of value and worth, and that I didn't need to be sort of ashamed and embarrassed of these moments that kept popping up when you abuse substance. So I gave up drinking, I gave up smoking, I decided to take on a new healthy lifestyle. My father was diagnosed with cancer, and from the day he was diagnosed until the day he died, we had 3 months to the day. And it is a pretty profound and spiritual experience to actually know you're with someone who, we're all dying. We should all know it, but to be told you have this much time. And then to have to say all the things that need to be said and wrap up these relationships so that you can live with them afterwards. It was pretty profoundly spiritual, and my sister and I were lucky enough to be with my father the moment that he left. You feel that transition. I have no clue what's next, but you feel that shift the moment someone is there and then they're gone. So it really altered me, the privilege of being with him when he died, and how deeply I felt that there was something more, what I didn't know, but I felt this then gaping hole in my life. Are you just going to keep living, or you're different now? You need to find something that has value and purpose. And so I kind of came to yoga with this emptiness in my life, and I still had this tendency of addiction and of uncontrollably doing things. And, when I came to yoga, I joke because it's probably the healthiest addiction I've ever had, but that's what it was. I started going so many times a week. I had to go. I couldn't live without it. I scheduled my whole life around yoga. But in that sort of unhealthiness of it, there was the practice, which is, if you let it, will give you so much. It kind of changed my perspective. I felt like I got to tap into this deeper spiritual side of myself that I'd always known was there and just hadn't really bothered to reach into. And then through my practice and this sort of ambitious hammering and needing to accomplish and be better, I very badly hurt myself in yoga. And I could not practice physically. And I had to, over the course of a year and a half, visit the side of yoga that had nothing to do with me moving my body. And that's kind of when my practice shifted again, because it was okay, can you sit with yourself? Can you look at yourself? Can you face who you are and work through your demons? And when I was able to start moving again, that's when yoga kind of became a more whole practice for me, where it was most days, it's physical, but there's so many other pieces of it. And I think that's when it finally was no longer an addiction. It was just this really wonderful thing that's woven through every day of my life in different ways on any given day. So that's the
awesome.
simple story.
Yeah. So you talked about encountering this kind of depth to your being that you could intuit was always there, but never really... I get the sense that there's a voluntary aspect to, becoming who you really are, or plunging into that more spiritual side of things. You think that kind of encountering death in the way you did was something that more or less pushed you into that, and or what are your thoughts about that side of people, anyways?
Yeah, like I think definitely. I think there's probably moments in many different ways in our lives where we are faced with like the truth. You know, I think like a moment where you have a belief you might die, like people who probably like your car skids and you have a moment where you believe this could be the end, and people say they see their lives flash or something like that. Like, so I think there's lots of moments like that, and I'd come up against them before in my own life. You know, some of them self-inflicted, you know, where there was moments I was like, whoa, you know, that could have been it. But it is voluntary, right? I think I always stepped back from the brink because I was like, I'm not ready for this yet, or I don't understand it. Or, you know, I just don't want to do the work, because it is also hard work. Mm-hmm. And there is a deep awareness of that, whether we consciously know it or not. So looking back, I see myself on the precipice so many times, and I never quite leapt. And then when my dad died, yeah, it was like, I did have that moment where it was like, this is like, your whole life is a choice, because we got to choose how we wove those last 3 months. And it was like, it's not just this that's a choice. It's all a choice. Like, you can't choose the things that happen to you, but you can definitely choose, you know, who you are, how you react, what you put out in the world. You know, you can choose trying to be a better human. And so it kind of shifted. Like, that's when I started looking. It was like, you know, who do you want to choose to be? I'd really been like, without realizing it, like, I've had a pretty great life, but, you know, a lot of struggle. And I really had this sort of like victim type mentality, like, oh, all these awful things happen to me. And like, you know, and when you're in that mode, you don't realize awful things happen to everybody. But after that, it was like, I don't want to be that person anymore. I'd rather take charge and like make some choices. And if shit happens, like, just decide how I'm going to deal with it. Not just sit there and lament the fact that something bad has happened to me, because we can all measure our bad things. Mm-hmm. There's whole countries filled with people who have a lot worse things than me. Like, there's no point in playing that game. So yeah, it just, you know, it gave me that gift of like, you know, are you going to actively start to make choices about who you are and who you want to be? And it really was like, time is running out. Mm-hmm. Beautifully so. I think our lives are valid because it does. Like, so what are you going to do? Like, you know, because I really, at that point in my life, had wasted a lot of time and just spent a lot of time thinking if I did this little bit of work, someone would knock on my door and be like, hey, heard you have a book to sell, or heard you have this. And it was like, holy crap, like, how much time have I spent just expecting life to congratulate me for doing 20% of something? Yeah. Like, how absurd. Like, and I was like, you need to start doing 100% or 120 or 90 or your best at least. Instead of this sort of like mediocrity that you just keep waiting for people to congratulate you for. Mm-hmm. So it just like, it really altered so many things for me. And I knew it right away. Like, I felt weird talking to a lot of people because I was so blessed with that journey I took with my dad and the experience of being with him dying. And it felt weird to be honest about it, even though I was devastated, because it felt a little bit like, you know, people might think I was really weird for feeling so lucky to have been there during that experience.
Because there's a preciousness to life that you really do encounter with death that most people just, they can't look at it and they feel that it's morbid, and so they find derogatory ways to view death rather than seeing that there is something to it that we learn from, but that also is enriching.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I had so many moments, you know, I was very lucky. You know, it was my sister and I who were there with my dad's partner of 20 plus years, her best friend and one of my dad's sisters. And we kind of created this like space of honesty. You wept when you needed to weep. You know, something funny would happen, we laughed our asses off. You know, there were so many moments leading up to and that week after he died that it was just such a space of honesty. And I remember having this like vision of, those cultures where someone dies and the women are allowed to scream and wail and tear at themselves. And I just had this moment of, like, it still gives me goosebumps of realizing how beautiful it is to be able to be the wholeness of ourselves. And being whole in that experience of my father, with the joy and the heartache and the laughter and the devastation. I don't think I've ever really been whole in my experiences of entire feeling. And that is so precious because we don't permit ourselves. We have good and bad. There's all this range of feelings. All of them are honest and beautiful, except for us in our society, there are good feelings and bad feelings. We don't really allow ourselves to experience them as valid if they're associated with bad. We're trying to fix them or undo them, or if somebody's feeling them, we try to take care of them or hug them or stop it. We just don't permit the entirety of ourselves. And I was lucky enough in that experience to have that, and I was like, I'm not giving this up. I don't even know what it is entirely, but I was like, I'm holding on to this. And I've tried to do that, and I feel like, living in the yoga world has, there's so much permission and space to feel and be and explore and get to know yourself, that it was such a lovely and, an almost perfect place for me to land, really. It
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's like when it might be more appropriate just to call the feelings like not necessarily pleasant versus pleasant. It's in the immediate experience of it. If it's an intensely negative emotion, it can be not the most pleasurable thing to experience, but that doesn't mean it's not the most appropriate thing to be feeling right then and there. And so I think, you're right, because people will avoid that feeling and push it back, or say, like, it's like something with your significant other is bugging the crap out of you. It's like, do you just talk about it immediately and set it straight and figure it out, or do you wait until there's 10 million other things? Because you wouldn't go into that uncomfortable conversation about whatever said thing was, then it's not like it actually goes away as a result of your own will to push it down. It just builds and builds and builds, and you get these psychological knots.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good way to put it. Yeah. I've one of my teachers and friends, Leslie Bishop, she does this work with nonviolent communication. And it's been really enlightening because in that style of communication, feelings are essentially, all feelings are results of needs either being met or not met. And that's how they're divided. So instead of like negative and positive, it's just like, if your needs aren't being met, you feel these things. If your needs are being met, you feel these things. And it's been a really interesting, like, they work with relationships and how you can communicate and all this kind of stuff. And it's been cool to bring this into my life this past year, and then to reflect back on all these other experiences with a little more knowledge. Like, when you learn something new and it clarifies something from like 10 years ago, and it's like, oh, I get it now. Yeah.
Totally.
So, it's been an interesting experience kind of reflecting on, I have these, like, our lives, I don't know if this happens to you, but like our lives get divided into little pieces. And every time I get to a new piece, I sort of refer to the last ones as my past life. And that point of my dad's dying is kind of like where I I speak of everything before that kind of as my past life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's like this symbolic representation of the phoenix burning and then being reborn. It's like everyone needs to go through that, and to varying degrees, but probably all the time. Like, you always need to be letting things go, and so that you can be the newest, most updated, most capable, competent individual.
I know, sometimes I think we get lost in these ideas of being done.
Yeah.
Like, I'm done, I'm good.
Oh, it's brutal. You're not done till you're in the ground.
Where's my medal? Perfect human, all done. Like, yeah.
One of the things that popped in my head while you were talking was, I'm going to mention Peterson here again. Someday I'll start listening to someone else a little more.
Take your time.
Yeah, exactly. He's got a lot of stuff to digest.
If it's working, keep using it.
Yeah. One of the things was like, okay, and it's obviously an oversimplification, but let's say the fundamental human problem is the fact that we're conscious.